This is AOS Shorts. Get better fast. Hello and welcome to another episode of AOS Shorts. Today I'm joined by Tom Loyn and Jack Armstrong to talk about their recent experiences at the Blood Tithe International Team Tournament. Tom and Jack cover all the things that you need to know when considering team tournaments in Age of Sigmar. How you select your team, how you put your list together, how the gameplay differs and the matchup process. There is so much great information that Tom and Jack cover in the show that I've tried to distill the key bullet points and put them along in a blog post to accompany the episode. So I highly recommend checking that out, especially around the pairing and matchup process. There was a lot of good information from Jack about the how you consider which lists you put up at different stages in that pairing and matchup process. It's certainly not intuitive, so I highly recommend that you check it out. Now, before we get into the show, just a couple of announcements. Tom is organising the London Age of Sigmar Grand Tournament, which is coming up in May. We'd covered it off in one of the earlier shows, but just another announcement in relation to this. So it is an Age of Sigmar Grand Tournament held at London's Olympic Stadium. It's not only AOS, and there's AOS for about 100 odd players. Still tickets available, last few tickets available, I understand, for 18 through to 20 May. Now, the London GT is mainly a 40k tournament. There's 400 and something odd players going to the 40k tournament, but there's also Age of Sigmar, Blood Bowl, Necromunda, War Master, all sorts of different events. So if you want a large US style convention type event right in your back door in London, then you can't look past the London GT. Now, where do you want to go for more information and tickets? It's lgtpresents.co.uk. And I'll put all the details in the show notes and the blog, but it's lgtpresents.co.uk. Now, talking about the AOS Shorts website, there's been lots going on since I last recorded a show. You'll see a whole range of information and blog posts on there about lists from the latest large events in the US and Australia and other places. So you can find, for instance, the list from the Las Vegas Open, from AdeptCon, the top lists, and the results from each of those events. So I highly recommend you check those out, the individual posts out, and also the wider archive, where you can find not only tournament packs, details, lists, and more. Now, also, thanks to the help of Tyler Emerson, of the Scrubby and Wells podcast, you would also see that there is a section, there is now an Age of Sigmar tournament calendar on aosshorts.com. Now you can find it easily by going to aosevents.org. That will take you straight there. This is basically a highlighted calendar of the top or the largest 2-day of Age of Sigmar events from around the world. So from the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and other places. So there's a couple of things on there. There's a simple list with links to the registration and details for each of the events. There's a Google Calendar that you can download and sync so that you know when the events are. And there's links through to the list archive and lists and results. So I highly recommend you check it out. If you're running an event like this, get in touch, let me know. I'll put the details up. Hopefully people can find it. As I said, the simple URL is aosevents.org, so hopefully that's an easy URL that people can remember and share around. Now, I think that's enough for announcements at the moment, other than to say Deepkin show will be coming out soon. Check out all the Deepkin coverage on the aosshorts.com site as well. Highly recommend it. Anyway, on with the show. Bye for now. Hello. I am now joined by Jack Armstrong and Tom Loyn. They have kindly joined me to come and talk about the great topic of Age of Sigmar team tournaments. In particular, how they differ from individual tournaments, the things that you need to take into account in preparing for them, in terms of compiling your team, putting your list together, and how you engineer success in your matchups. So Jack, Tom, how are you going, guys?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having us on again.
Yeah, very well. Thank you for inviting us on.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a great show last time. And for anyone at home that didn't listen to the last show where I had this duo on to talk about the London Grand Tournament and also how to write tournament lists for the particular pack that you are going to face at that tournament, I highly recommend you check it out. It was a great show. So, as I said in the intro, there were three things that I want to cover. And they're largely going to be grounded in your guys' experience of the recent team tournaments that you have been to. Recently, a couple of weekends ago now, was the Blood Tithe International Team Tournament run by Mark in London and was attended by, was it 16 four-man teams?
Yeah, it was 20, despite the beast from the east, the famous snowstorm that meant we needed a few subs on the day.
I was very impressed that despite all the weather and being in the nation's capital, you managed to get 8.
And the useless UK infrastructure, yeah.
I was amazed that Norway made it, Scotland didn't. I thought that was brilliant.
I think that just tells you everything that you need to know about UK infrastructure, really.
The Norwegians skied over.
Yeah. So you guys obviously have a lot of experience, both with recent experience with Blood Tithe and before that Six Nations, the Age of Sigmar team tournament that was run last year in Derby, I believe, and then before that under Warhammer Fantasy, the various European team championships at the various levels of Warhammer Fantasy battles. So let's start at the beginning. So let's talk about team tournaments in general, and we'll do this around what we've been seeing in Age of Sigmar tournaments, which are largely sort of 3 or 4 player team tournaments. We haven't seen anything so far which is the size of the old European Team Championship teams of 8-man teams, or 8-player teams, I should say. So what are the things that you need to take into account when you're putting your team together? If you're building a team from the ground up, what are you thinking about in terms of players, lists, the whole shooting match? Who wants to go first? Jack? Tom?
I was just going to say first off, the thing that I noticed, because I used to do a lot more 8-man tournaments, was pretty much just ETC, Six Nations, things like that. I never really did a lot of 4-man 8th edition tournaments. And I think the biggest difference for me was thinking, because we're Team Wales, you don't have quite the plethora of talent that you might get in Team England or other teams to choose from. So with Team Wales, we always relied on having, 3 or 4. I mean, we never did amazingly, but we got up to the middle of the tables by the end. And we always relied on having sort of 3 or 4 bigger hitters that we really had to get good matchups for. And then a few guys who were like, oh, well, they'll just have to be the throwaway because they can't do anything else. Whereas I think Jack might have a different experience in that we've got eight players who we can specifically put into the roles that we need. And so the biggest thing for me for this 4-man tournament that we had for Blood Tithe is I didn't have that plethora. I had to get 4 people, and I was like, all 4 of us have got to pull our weight, and it was quite challenging. It was much more challenging for that than it was at 8-man level.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's definitely the case, and I know that's something that us in the sort of smaller geographic regions face when putting teams together for European team championships. Is you can't put, it is harder to fill an 8-man team than a 4. But certainly, as I was saying to Jack before we started, we see more 4 and 3-man events in New Zealand, Australia, the US in terms of team events. So smaller teams basically to reduce the barrier of entry and make it easier to put a team together and to have more teams available within a smaller field.
It's also quite a good point, though, is actually, what you're building your team for. One of the most important criteria is actually people who are going to turn up. And so, not just trying to pick necessarily the best players, but people who are relied upon. Because if you've got a team of 4 and one person drops out the day before, then you're kind of screwing 3 of you. So I think it's more important to try and get reliable people. Just to actually make sure you can all attend.
Exactly. I mean, and we had that for Blood Tithe, and that one of probably the top players out of the 4, a better player, dropped out about a week before, and he's done that before. So now, I'm having to not consider him for the next tournaments coming up. But we were fortunate that Pete Humpage stepped in, and he was a decent player, but we could have just been left with turning up with 3 people and having no idea the quality or anything. I'd rather have a sort of reliable person who's decent and you know what you're getting than, like, say, a really good player who may or may not come. It's kind of a 50-50.
Yeah, well, from the original team I pulled together, 2 of them didn't end up making it. So it was kind of, we faced similar. It's interesting how, people, thankfully, with a bit more notice. But
I was wondering how Mark Wildman got into a team called
no,
the Winners.
he was actually one of the original 4. It was the other 2 who.
I'm joking.
So then the other criteria, obviously, for me, with naming a team, a very lack of imagination, called the Winners, was people who I thought would win. And so actually, I actually think an 8-man team tournament has more tactics involved. I mean, we'll get on to it maybe a bit later, but because there's only 4 people in the matchup, you can pretty much control one, but you've got less control over more of the matchups. Whereas in an 8-man team event, because of the nature of it, you've got a lot more control over more of the matchups.
Yeah, I completely agree.
In the 4 kind of scenario, you really need 4 people who can pretty much win most games, and you can't have that many. You can normally carry one list that has some awful matchups, but on the whole, I think it actually favours all-round strong lists.
Yeah, do you find that was like what I was thinking for our 4-man team? We were kind of looking at sort of almost more like 4 net lists rather than we're going to go for 8 lists and we're going to have this list that does that, this list that does that. But it's more like we need 4 all-rounders because they could end up in any matchup almost.
No, I think that's very true. But I think you could carry one list which had a very bad binary matchup. And I think it's almost, again, jumping slightly ahead, but it's showed by one of the top performers was a Seraph and Croak list. And that has a notoriously bad matchup against Fire Slayers or Overlords, which it pretty much auto loses to. But it can beat everything else. But you can pretty much guarantee you can avoid those 2 pairings. So you can kind of carry one list that has some very bad matchups as long as it also has some very strong ones.
Yeah, those are all very good points. And it's interesting to see how that dynamic changes between 8 and 4. 8, as you say, having much more ability to go for almost, I want to call them sort of one-sided lists or lists with one dynamic, which have got strong weaknesses, which you can avoid through the matchup process. Before we go a bit more into the different roles and how you put together the specific lists for this tournament, one of the things I noted from having a look at some of the team tournament packs out there, different team tournaments have different approaches as to the sort of house rules or limits in the pack in terms of how you can put your list together. So Blood Tithe, for instance, there was a rule that there was no duplicate war scrolls between the lists except for summoning, which gave you an out. There's been a team tournament in Australia, MOAB or Moab, which had as a rule that you had to take 1 army from each Grand Alliance. So you had to carry a destruction and a death list along with you. I can't remember whether or not there were any particular restrictions in Six Nations. I think Six Nations had the no duplicates.
Six Nations had one of one of each Grand Alliance again, but it's easier with 8-man. I mean, I think the restriction and why I don't like that in a 4-man team event is not everyone has 10 armies sitting at home. I mean, actually, we probably could have done it quite easily, but it's hard enough trying to find 4 people who can all make the event. And then if you have to make each one play a different army, that can actually be quite a big barrier to entry for, people actually either being able to or wanting to play.
Yeah, it's just much more inclusive, isn't it? With being able to bring anyone along. I think Age of Sigmar is supposed to be that. It's in a very inclusive game, maybe more so than 8th used to be. So I prefer rules that allow you to build a team and sort of bring your army, the army you want to bring, rather than say, you must bring this.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I like that. The bit I like about the one from each Grand Alliance is if you've got the right vibes, then it does mean that you've got a bit of a list challenge or build with destruction or otherwise, and trying to put some of those lists into the matchups in a way that means that they're not automatically just going to go under the bus or be paired into something expecting to lose, because that's no fun. You've brought someone along to fill this gap, this role that you need, and then they're just going to be sent out there to try and get a minor loss each game.
Well, it's also, I think one of the things that could almost be looked at in team tournaments is the scoring system. I think over the 5 rounds, Mark said there was only 1 minor recorded in every single game. And so the results were very, very binary. It was you smashed or you got smashed. And the secondary missions came into play. Actually, they added a good dynamic, but actually having some kind of proportional system, like they used to be the 20-0 system under the old 8th edition, could well come back in some form.
Let's just talk about that scoring system. So, for the benefit of people at home or who haven't seen the pack, you got 30 points for a major win, you got 20 points for a minor win, you got 15 points for a draw, 10 points for a minor loss, 5 for a major loss. And then there was the secret mission dynamic, which Jack mentioned, and you get 5 points per achieved mission in relation to that.
Each player can only have a maximum of 2, and then the score is capped at 30. So essentially, if you get a major victory, then any minor victories you get don't give you anything extra. So the skill is to try and allocate your cards to matchups that you think you might lose. And so that was the real skill, because essentially you could then get 3 major wins, and as long as the person who got a major loss also got 1 card, then you got 100 points, which was the maximum you could get in a round. And then actually in some of the rounds where people were drawing, if you then got all 4 of your objectives, even if you won 2 rounds, lost 2 rounds, you could still get, 90 points if you managed to do all that. So it was a huge difference to be able to correctly allocate those cards.
And I really, really like that as well, because it means for people, the game enjoyment was just there as well. Because I'd have guys who'd come up to me and go, "Oh, why have you got me that matchup? I've never, in Duality, for example, he's got a Star Dragon and all I've got are rubbish 5 wound heroes. I'm never going to win it." Yeah, that's fine, but but he's got, bad battle line units. So your whole mission for this game is you're going to lose. That's just what's going to happen. But your whole mission is you've got to get those battle line units. Just throw your whole army into doing that. And they're like, "Oh yeah, great, got something to play for." Whereas in an individual team, they wouldn't have that. They would just lose.
Yeah, when we played the Marauders, which I think was the other kind of best team there, who we lost to over the round, the guy I played had an army that I pretty much beat it turn 1, and I don't think there's any way I could have really lost the matchup. And they knew that, but they paired him and they gave him 2 missions they knew he could get, and they just said, "Lose, get 2 missions, you're getting us 15 points." And so it was a complete tactical loss, and it worked very well for them over the round because they ended up scoring more points than us.
Yeah, I think this is my favourite thing in the entire pack, is the fact that you have got a scoring system that emphasises handing missions to people in matchups where they're expected to lose. So it gives that player something to achieve. And this system on its own wouldn't work unless you had the cap of individual player points capped at a major win. So you can't just give missions to people who are going to win anyway. You incentivize to give it and go and get the points from people that you're expecting to get either a minor win or a minor loss or a major loss. So I think it's really good for the dynamic. Now, just before we go on to the lists, I thought I might touch on what those 4 missions were. So the game, for the benefit of those at home, the tournament was 5 games of General's Handbook 2017 scenarios. I think the only scenario changes were that Knife to the Heart wasn't played, and Battle for the Pass, due to space issues, was played on a sort of horizontal rather than vertical deployment.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is that Mark did that because he was worried about people being able to get round rows of tables, and actually at the event it was fine. He kind of said that himself, that it would have been fine, and I think personally it's a really big change, and one of the huge advantages of playing it lengthways is it changes the dynamic of some of the lists. So for instance, Caradron Overlords, you can actually deploy out of range of their Alpha Strike, and some other lists as well. It just gives you more depth to be able to get away from people killing you first turn, and same against stuff like Murder Host. So it's really, really important that you keep a lengthways deployment. So please, other people, don't change it, because it just changes the game in a very, I think, important way.
Yeah, I think that was one. I think both of those had probably an impact on the number of minor victories that you saw there as well. But it does fundamentally change that scenario. But in terms of the missions that were then the secret missions, each team had a deck of 4 custom secret mission cards. And before each game, but after individual pairings, these cards had to be divided up within the team before each game, with each player receiving a maximum of 2 or a minimum of none. And the 4 missions were basically, first one was destroy any 3 enemy battle line units. The second one was destroy the enemy general and or 2 enemy leader war scrolls by the end of battle round 2. Third was to destroy an enemy behemoth with a battle line unit in the combat phase. I wonder how many times that was achieved.
I got
and
it.
number 4 was destroy any 2 enemies.
Oh, easily. My army was perfect for it. When you got 30
30 liberators. Okay, well, 30 libs.
Yeah.
For destroy any 2 enemy units during your own turn, either by killing them or causing them to flee to battle shock. So those were the 4 secret missions that were available to be used. Any last comments on the sort of the scoring system or the secret missions before we move on to your team's lists and how you put them together?
I guess the only thing I was going to say is, Jack, you probably agree. Do you think the sort of 20-0 system thing would work? And obviously going into this major minor thing, do you think that's mission specific? The fact that the Games Workshop missions just aren't. I think they're good. They're not bad missions to do. They're just not actually really that well written in terms of getting minors versus majors.
Apart from Knives to the Heart, yeah, because it's actually quite difficult to get exactly the same score.
Yeah.
So no, I'd agree with that.
So they just need to have a much clearer, if you get a lot of them are objective based. So if you've got this number of points by turn 3, you're on a minor or something like that. They just need to put clearer victory conditions in. I think that are more easily achieved.
Or even it's the case of actually if you're within a certain amount of points. So some people have said, so if the score is only 10 points between the two of you, then it's a minor. If it's not 10 points, sorry. If it's if you're on Blood and Glory and you need to have more than 4 points more than your opponent to get a major, those type of things, which I think are definitely viable.
Yeah, and they do listen, GW, so hopefully that'll change. And soon, if they bring out a new general handbook, etc., that would make it a lot better.
One of the other things I was thinking about before we move on was, and perhaps this is more apt for 8-man tournaments rather than 4, is, of course, this 4-man tournament was played with all four matchups being played using the same scenario. But if you go to 8, then you could add another dynamic to the matchup process, which is that you could have the round being across, say, 4 scenarios, and you've got 2 games within each of the 4 scenarios. And not only are you pairing into matchups, but you're pairing into scenarios, which would add another dynamic.
That was really good when ETC used to do that.
Yeah.
Well, it makes pairing spreadsheets a nightmare, but
yeah, it sort of makes your head hurt when you think about that many variables at the pairing stage. Cool. So onto your lists. Jack, why don't you go first, being team winners?
So I guess this is the other point around actually how to pick your list, which I think is quite important. So we definitely look for a while at just, what are the 4 strongest lists up there? And, I think something like having a Kharadron Overlords list would have given us a huge amount of power, both in the matchups process, because they're what I call a bully list, as in there are so many lists that can't play against them for the fear of just being one turn killed, that you can control the matchup process quite nicely with them. And so part of me wanted, someone like Chris Myhill, who was in our team, to take, we could have easily borrowed a mixed order, the Overlords list, and he would probably have been quite good at picking it up very quickly and learning to play it. But actually, I'm also a big believer in people playing what they like and what they feel comfortable with. And also, it is meant to be a tournament and it is meant to be enjoyable. So it's not just about the best list. It's about lists that they like, they enjoy, and they're going to, do well with. And so a lot of it, we all commented on each other's lists, and there was a lot of go round. But in the end, it really was, what do you feel comfortable with? Go with that. So for me, that was, I've been playing the Vanguard wing quite a lot successfully. So I went with that with the addition of a couple of Medusas just to try and help in the mirror match as well as against some of the Horde. I mean, the Vanguard wing can suffer against Overlords. So again, it helps with that matchup and some of the other stuff I might have been seeing. Then we had Chris Myhill, who did very well at the Masters with a mixed order list. And so he took a different version of that, which again, he did very, very well with. Then we had Mark Wildman, who was almost going to take Tzeentch for a while, but the new Death book was out. And although I think Tzeentch is a more powerful list and a more powerful book by quite a long way than Death, there's also everyone plays against it and everyone knows its tricks and knows how to play against it. And I think there's quite a lot of mileage in having something that people underestimate or people don't understand, because then they might pair up negative or incorrectly against it, as opposed to taking a power list that everybody knows the counters to. So Mark took a death list, and then last but not least, we had Craig Nabmar, who had taken I think, a very interesting list of the Masters, who people predicted he'd do quite well with, but he'd kind of written it and taken it without playing it beforehand. So he managed to then tweak it into what I think was then a very good murder host, gore host combined, with lots of blood letters that he could end up doing mortal wounds on 2s, which happened quite a lot, which with the 3 slaughter priests. So again, it was just a good multiple threat and good at some of the scenarios list. So overall, I mean, we did think for a while about trying to, have some lists for certain scenarios or some lists for certain matchups, but in the end, we just went for 4 people who knew what they were doing, playing lists they were comfortable with, which were solid lists and didn't have too many bad matchups.
No, there's certainly 4 very solid lists when you look at them. If anyone's interested, all the lists are up on aosshorts.com, and they'll be up in the show notes for this episode as well, so people can go in and see the details. But it's an interesting balance that you've got across the list, and it's interesting to hear your reasoning behind the Legion of Night list with Mark, and I'm sure that comes into the pairings process, which we will get onto when you've got those sort of wildcard or more maverick lists, which people aren't as familiar with. So
the same with Chris Myhill's order list. So he basically had he had the dragon, he had Croak with a Saurus banner bearer, he had a unit of 40 dwarfs, a few bolt throwers. It really just was a bit of odds and sods all thrown together. But he knew exactly the purpose of every single thing in that list. But even me, who I've been talking to him for a couple of months while he was going through different iterations, I didn't know what half the units were meant to do. And so the chances of an opponent who'd never even seen it before knowing how to play against it, and some of the games he used Croak as bait so that they killed Croak early on so he could then kill them. And, to most people, using Croak as bait and not summoning a Balewind with him would be a bit of an anathema. But actually, it was just that kind of the underestimating or playing a different style to how people anticipated, actually allowed him to win some matchups that I didn't think he was going to be able to.
I'm still trying to figure out that dwarf unit, that warrior unit, how it. I'm like, how is that good? I don't get it. One day.
I've got 40 dwarfs sitting on my shelves. They might have to pop onto rounds. We will see. No, it's interesting. Before we get onto Tom's team lists, I understand that the list for Blood Tithe were all put out in advance.
Yes.
So one of the things that'd be interesting to hear once we've gone through both sets of lists is then the sort of what work you guys did between the lists coming out for the tournament and the tournament starting, as it were. Hearing the different approaches that you took in terms of preparing, whether there were spreadsheets, matchups, assessments, etc., in order to prepare for the event. But before we get onto that, Tom, do you want to cover off the process that you guys went through for Team Wales?
Yeah, sure. I was listening to Jack saying, finding people that know what they're doing is a good start. So maybe we fell at the first hurdle. But yeah, I mean, mine was, we did think about, I think one guy changed, something that would fit in better with it. But it was much more, like Jack said, what have people been using? What are they comfortable with? What do they play? Because actually, Team Wales, whilst we do want to be competitive at events, but we're still going to go and have fun. And I want people to play 5 games that they enjoy over the weekend. I don't want someone to turn up with a quotation marks blocking list that they just sit there sort of doing nothing for 5 games and don't have an enjoyable weekend. So there was very much that. I kind of asked everyone straight up, what do you want to play? And then put it together with and suggested different list types based upon what other people wanted to play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so essentially you say, who's going to use which scrolls, and then once someone's taken them, no one else can have them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we ended up, and I sort of went last because I thought, I'll wait to see what other people want to do, and then I'll just try and fill in a gap. So we ended up going with, and this is the issue, because we had a dropout, it kind of actually changed the dynamics of the list a little bit by the time we got there. But we ended up going with, Mark went with Nurgle, so obviously the new Nurgle have come out, and that was fascinating because he went with Nurgle for Team Wales last year, And last year, Nurgle was a very static kind of, tar pity blocking list. And whilst it can still do that, this year his Nurgle list was a sort of, ridiculous, really fast, can Alpha Strike. Yeah. And I thought it was quite an interesting change the way that happened. Yeah, so he went with generally mixed Nurgle stuff with the sort of 15 knights everybody's been taking, and lots of fast sort of different things that you can put in, and did pretty well with that. Matt took the Change Host, and this was again a little bit of a sort of Walesism in that Matt's a relatively new player to Age of Sigmar, so he took Tomb Kings last year, and then obviously Tomb Kings are gone, so he's been trying to find something that he'd enjoy playing with, and he's played the Change Host for maybe 2 months. So he's getting a lot better with it, and actually over the course of the event, I think he improved just by practicing and playing in a team environment. But it was one of those like growth things for him. And then we were going to bring a Sylvaneth list. Jake was going to bring that, and then he dropped out. And fortunately, Pete Humpage came in with another Sylvaneth list. It was just a bit different. But he ended up taking, and it's interesting to see how the General's Handbook really moves on sort of year on year, because he took the Gnarl Roots Wargrove list with the sort of unkillable Tree Lord Ancient and all the hunters that was the ripping face about a year ago. And now, just in the new scenarios and everything, it doesn't quite fit in with what it used to. People know what it does.
And the new points is in you're about a unit or two down on what you used to be able to get. I think that was the big difference.
Exactly. But he did quite well with it, and it still does really well in certain scenarios like Duality. We knew it was going to do well and things like that. And then I took a sort of general mixed Stormcast Eternals list. I was going to take a more aggressive list initially. I was thinking, things like Vanguard Wing and stuff like that. But then when Mark was taking very much an Alpha Strike list, I thought, and we didn't have much to deal with ranged armies. I ended up taking more Judicators and more of a list to try and deal with that sort of stuff. So it was a sort of Judicators, big block of Fulminators, and then Medusas to deal with the Hordes list in the end. But it did pretty well. I was quite pleased with it.
No, it does look like it's a good toolkit sort of list for team tournaments. You got a lot of options in terms of your hero setup as well, with your Lord Celestant on Dracoth, your Castellant, your 2 Relictors, your Xeros, and a Mistweaver. I hope there was some good stories.
I was going to say, just anything with a Castellan and 4 Fulminators with Staunch Defender is, it's going to struggle to be that bad.
Yeah, I agree. I was just trying to avoid mortal wounds. If I avoided mortal wounds, they probably couldn't kill me. And then it was just thinking about how I could do the missions. I did struggle with people with lots of bodies, because that inherent, if you've got 20 models, you can't take the objective off them. So trying to think about how to block people off objectives and which units you need to thin out enough that you can actually take the objective and things like that was quite a big challenge.
Thinking, Tom, you poor thing.
And I'm not very good at that.
Thinking and gameplay, who would have known that they're both important? So between the list coming out and the start of the tournament, what work did you guys do in order to prepare for the event in terms of analysing the list? Any? Some? Lots? What did you guys do?
See, I've done so many ETCs and other team events where you have complicated spreadsheets and you have to go through every one of the different lists. And this is the old ETCs. They're up to 40 teams at times. So, you're going through, 400 lists, trying to mark them all for matchups. And then, as you said, do some of them with different scenarios and what that affects it. And then you only end up playing 6 teams. And so of the 400 you've marked, you end up facing 6 and being paired against potentially 42. And so I just found it all a bit pointless. And so my thing to the team was, look, as the draw gets done, we'll pair against them, and everything else just ignore. So the only kind of prep I did is I had a look, and I actually looked more at teams who I thought were good and I thought we might be facing. So I looked at the Marauders, and then there was the Cunningest Ruck, and then there was a couple of teams who I just
Team well.
Yeah, scanned over them. It's kind of the people who I thought, we're probably going to end up playing you at some point. With the kind of the ones I spent, and more kind of just as a general interest as opposed to any kind of pairings or how we do against them. In fairness, I didn't actually look any at all at La Guillotine, or however you pronounce it, which was the French team we played in the last round, who actually, when you looked at their list in detail, they were really, really good, and some of the best ones we found there as a match-up set. But yeah, I hadn't really clicked, until I looked at them in more detail. And also Nico's team, it was one of the South London Legions who had a lot of one drops. It seemed like they almost had a concerted effort to get as many lists as possible to be single drops, which can cause problems.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what Nico and his team's thoughts were behind that, because that's obviously a very different approach to the sort of let's take 4 individually strong, well-rounded lists, because what you're trying to do with the one drops is you're trying to skew the pairing process so that you win more outcomes than others, because if you've got a set of 4 one-drop lists, then it means your opponent can't hide lists which are vulnerable to one-drops.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and that used to come out in 8th edition. I remember one of the years we did the best with Wales was when we didn't actually go for, right, we're going to take this list for this, and more of a general team toolkit. And actually, if you remember, there was a period in 8th edition where monsters really weren't that good, but that was because there were a lot of people with cannons and things like that. But we just decided to take 8 monster mash lists. And actually, when you play in a team environment, you soon discover that people haven't got 8 lists that can deal with monster mash lists. So suddenly when you're pairing up against people, they're like, okay, we've got 3 lists that can deal with it, but the other 5 are just going to get overrun because you haven't thought about that matchup, because you wouldn't think anyone was crazy enough to do it. So when you get in a team environment, suddenly lists that in an individual environment would just get beaten 4 games out of 6 will suddenly be able to win.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's that thinking not only about the sort of overarching meta, but then the meta within the actual tournament itself, in terms of what other teams are going to be, how other teams are going to be constructing their lists. And as you say, if you can take something completely out of left field, then you might skew it. Now, that's not going to probably win you the overall event, but it might get you sitting up in their sort of top quartile, which might be an aim that you want to do, if otherwise you might be down below the mid-tables or below.
Yeah, exactly. And it sounds like actually we did more preparation than Jack, probably, and purely because I agree with him, actually, in a 4-game environment, 4-player environment. I think the matchups are simple enough that you can sit down when the teams are opposite you, read through them, you go, right, we want to try and get this matchup and this matchup, so let's think about what we need to put up now. Whereas in an 8-player environment, you have to think a bit more ahead of time because it's more complicated. You might not have enough time to really think that through. But the reason we did more prep is because this is Team Wales. We are going to do an 8-man tournament. This is kind of a preparation event. So I was like, I want to get the guys into the mindset of thinking about all the lists at the event and how they might approach it. So we did the sort of standard. I just sent out a spreadsheet and got them to look through all the lists and put a green, amber, red system for what they thought they might get. And we sort of did it over different scenarios as well. We had a little think there because there are slightly different types of scenarios. So tried to get them to think a bit more about how they'd approach it. And then actually it was ironic and then I had a tweak. I had a look through and was like, no, he's wrong. He's not going to get green in that. Change it. But then when we got into the actual environment, I was amazed by how often it was just incorrect. I was looking at the team ahead of me. I was like, we've got 2 guys who put down green against this list, but they really can't play it. They've not thought this through. So when we got into the environment, some of the prep wasn't as good as we thought, maybe.
Yeah, it's that sort of false sense of security and analysis that it might be better to just sort of...
Yeah. Well, also scenario-based as well, because if you thought about, I could beat that list, but then actually, we're now playing duality and he's got, whatever it may be, a Celestin on a Dracoth who's really difficult to kill. Normally I'd just be able to move all my guys on the objectives and win, but actually in this particular scenario I can't. So it's interesting how when you're suddenly in the scenario, actually it's different.
Very good. Let's move on to the pairings process and how you take those lists that you have so carefully prepared and engineer the matchups that you want, so that over the course of the 4 games within any particular round, you're going to get the result that you want, which is hopefully a max 100 cap. So in terms of the pairing process at a 4-man tournament, this was the pairing process used at Blood Tithe. So each team's got 4 lists. Each team selects 1 list which they put forward face down. So every team's got matchup cards, which has got the name of the list on it. So each team selects 1, puts it face down in the middle. Those selections are then revealed simultaneously. So what you've got in the middle of the table are 1 list from each side. Then what happens is each team picks 2 options, which they also take out of their hand and put face down on the table. Those options are to face the first selection from your opponent. So both teams do that. So you've now got 3 cards on the table, 2 revealed in the middle, 3 cards for each side on the table, 2 revealed in the middle, and 2 pairs face down. Both teams then reveal them. Then each team then gets to choose the army from the opponent's pair that they want their first selection to face. So that's the first pairing that happens in the event. Then what happens is that the refused card, so the selection which hasn't been picked, faces the remaining card in the team's hand, and vice versa. Have I got that right? That covered off all 4 matchups?
That's probably the clearest explanation I've heard. You did a good job there.
I was going to say that's the interesting thing, the difference between the 8-man tournament, because when you see the 2 cards are flipped in front of you, you're at what the decision you're actually making is what other card he's got left in his hand, so you're kind of looking at 2 matchups. Whereas in the 8-man,
you still do that, but it's just in the last pairing.
Yeah, well, exactly. But the initial bit, it goes back into your hand, doesn't it? So it adds that complexity where, actually, I might want to grab that one now because it's the lesser of 2 evils. But in the 4-man tournament who's going to be playing what, so you can kind of figure it out a little bit more.
Right. So effectively what you're doing is you are putting forward, you're deciding 3 matchups in one go. That was the point that you were trying to make, or you were making, Tom, which is that because what you're doing with picking your choice from your opponent's pair is the consequences of what's going to happen with the refused choice, and you also know what's going to happen with the option which is in your opponent's hand.
So you know 2. So you get control over 2, and your opponent gets control over 2. So so essentially what happens is so I can't remember what actually happened in the Wales game, but so say if but for the pair of options that they've given you to face the army that you put up, that the 2 armies, the one you put up and the one in your hand will face the 2 that they've given you, and vice versa. So that one you have ultimate 100% control over what those 2 armies face. Whereas whatever they put up against you, the 2 that you give them, you have lost complete control over, and they can choose exactly how they want to match them up. So that's the really important thing to know.
Excellent. That's far clearer than my attempt at explaining it. So we're talking about 2 matchups that you can control and 2 that you don't have control over. So let's talk about the consequences of that in terms of what list you choose to put where.
So we came up to quite a clear strategy at the end, which we worked out almost as we went. So we went through all 4 of our army lists against the opponents, and we said who has the single worst matchup. We like one really, really, I'm just going to lose this, but with nothing else that's that bad. I.e., they can put up any 2 armies from their lists, and I will always want to play one of those 2. So if you had 2 awful matchups, then you were bad, or even if you had 3. But if you only had 1, which was I'm going to lose this, but you'd play any of the other 3, you were the army we put up first. We then said, which are the 2 armies which have the most kind of even matchups, i.e., there's nothing that auto beats us, everything's a game, some are better than others, but actually everything I've got a chance against, and they were our counter. And so because obviously you lose control over those 2, so you need them to be able to play everything. And then the other list, which it could have had some good or some bad, we could hold back in our hand because we can also allocate that one. So that was really our strategy.
Yeah, so just stepping through that is that if you've got a one-sided list which has got a bad matchup, then you put that up first because you're going to have the control of a choice out of 2 lists to match against that. So if the bad matchup is in one of the pair, you can choose the other option and you've got a safe matchup. For the 2 more well-rounded ones, they're the ones which you put up in your pair because you don't have any control over those matchups, so you want those to be as well-rounded as possible. And then the sort of leftover is something which could be good or bad or whatever. But at least you've engineered 3 out of the 4 matchups, hopefully more favourably to you than your opponent.
Yes, exactly that. And and quite a few times we had where the pair that we had control over, we managed to get 2 people who had one really bad matchup. We managed to almost flip it around. Actually, I might pull up. I can't remember what the draw was against you, Tom, because we played Wales in the first round, and I think both the lists we put up first. Yeah, no, it was because the list we put up first had an awful matchup, and the list we had in our hand had an awful matchup. And the pair we got against, that Tom put up against us, included both of them, but they were different, so we could pair both of the people who had one awful matchup into a favourable matchup, just because of how we paired it. So it worked very nicely. But to do that, we had to have one sacrifice, which was a bit of Mark to Tom, which was a bad matchup for us, but it wasn't particularly bad. It just wasn't good either. And so, we kind of, you often have to give away one because, you're putting 2 up, which they can choose. And so they can engineer a good matchup of themselves as well, which is why it's so important to.
It probably would have helped if Mark had known what Fulminators did. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, and I agree with Jack. We had quite a similar, but probably slightly less well thought through approach where we would again look at the opposing matchups and figure out what list we put up. It was probably slightly different to yours because we were thinking what list we put up actually had the least bad matchups, and we put them up first. So it's similar to you, but we weren't thinking, specifically one. I would just look. So for example, if we were playing against, we had one team where they had barely any mortal wound stuff. It was all stuff that did damage without mortal wounds. So I was like, right, my list is going up first because unless you got mortal wounds against Fulminators, that's going to tank out anything, do really well. So we'll put me up first, and that should be okay. So in a way, I think it's different to how I used to approach it with 8th edition, which was more, I need a sort of tar pitty list that will probably get a 10-10. We're hoping for a 10-10, but can't really win. And let's just put that up first and like the proverbial throw it under the bus kind of thing. That's not really how we approached it. It was more, let's put up our one that's got the most good matchups. Weirdly.
Yeah, so I think that's wrong. because then, you can then end up with with the 2 that you counter with, that then one of them can be exploited into an awful matchup or both of them. Whereas if the list that's got all good matchups, because you have control over that, whereas if the list that have the most good matchups, you want to give to them so they have no good choices to make. Whereas if you give them a list where they can engineer bad matchups for you, then that's much stronger for the opposition. So likewise, if you hadn't been put up and you'd been to counter, you would have given us a lot more trouble because we'd have had to have then worked out who to pair you against, and we wouldn't have had such favourable matchups.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I do think it can be won and lost, not necessarily in the pairings, but you can definitely set yourself a very big uphill struggle if you get it wrong.
Yeah, because I think you ended up giving me the choice of you or Mark, I think. And I was like, well,
that was it.
And I was like, well, I'm just going to lose against Vanguard Wings. It's a better Stormcast list, so I'm going to have to play Mark, and we're going to put Pete up against you, which is basically what you wanted, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if we'd gone the other way around, we both would have definitely.
But more importantly, me and Mark would have played any of your lists, whereas it was Craig and Chris had one awful matchup each, and so we both managed to get them out of their awful matchup. So that was the most important thing. It wasn't, me and Mark would have played anyone. So that's the key. Whereas because you put yourself up first, you took yourself out of contention.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's a really interesting analysis and dissection of that matchup process. It's interesting that even with a 4-player matchup process, you can have 2 very different approaches to how you're selecting your lists and thinking about the play and counterplay that comes from the matchup process.
Yeah.
Clearly one's better than the other.
One wins events.
Well, no, it's good. And actually for us, this was we are quite new to the AOS team thing, particularly, Team Wales. We only sort of played last year and we didn't have a full team in the Six Nations stuff. So this is all learning stuff. It's all really, I think a lot of people are learning the AOS team environment. So it's good to go up against really good teams like yourselves and do badly, and then sort of dissect why we've done badly and what we could have done better. Because next time, I know that. I know what went wrong, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I shouldn't go out and publicly tell everyone. Damn it.
Okay. So was there anything else that you wanted to cover on the sort of pairing and matchup process before we go through to the sort of in-game dynamic of team tournaments?
Well, the only other thing really was then once you've got your matchups and you kind of think, okay, so normally what would happen is you'd have two or three good ones and one bad one. You then had to go, okay, so which of the nailed on 100%, I'm just going to win this, and which of the it could still go either way, and then you had to try and divvy up your cards, and you couldn't give like the mission cards, and you couldn't give more than two to any one player. So often what we said was, right, you've got the worst matchup, we'll give you the two most achievable cards for you, and then the two matchups which are slightly swingy will both, you can have a card each in case they go down. And then the game, which was you should really win this, 9 times out of 10, then they didn't get any cards.
Just a point of clarification, was the secret missions, so the secret missions are selected and allocated in secret, but then when you get to the tabletop, do they get revealed? Does your opponent know that you have got secret? One, do they know that you have secret missions at all that have been allocated to you? And then
it was all closed.
Okay, so they don't even know that you've been assigned a card.
No. So yeah, that was an interesting. In fairness, we never actually got that checked. It was just because one of the missions had something saying you must reveal you're trying to do this at the beginning of the turn. You tried to do it, which kind of made us think, maybe they're not.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Okay. So moving on to the actual games themselves, do the games and the game dynamics differ for a team tournament as opposed to an individual tournament?
Tom, what do your call?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, it's still like there's still, for me, the way I play, I sort of captain team events. I like to go into it kind of hopefully knowing what's going to happen. So I'm still playing my game because hopefully by the time you've gone in, you've done the matchup process, right? I know Pete's going to get plastered by Jack, so that assuming that I've got to win this, he's going to have that. Then obviously, halfway through the game as the captain particularly, you've got to then go and check what's going on, that what you expect to happen is happening. But I think I'm less, maybe wrongly, hands-on than some captains where I don't go around saying, right, you've got to push now, you've got to do this. I try and set up the matchup at the beginning. And, hopefully, and I kind of know vaguely what's going to happen.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I kind of actually disagree, and I think it comes back to the very binary scoring system. So I think in a scenario where you get a 18-2 or you're sitting on a 12-8, and then the captain comes around and says, "No, we need a few more points." You push.
Yeah.
But then I get that, but actually in this environment, you're either winning or you're losing, and there's no such thing as sitting on a safe win. And maybe actually the only one where that would have been applicable would be knife to the heart. But where actually you could be sitting on a safe win, and then your captain says, "No, actually, I need you to go all out for their home objective," as opposed to just sitting on yours and taking a draw. But actually, in every other game, it was a case of you're either going to win or you're going to lose. And actually, there's nothing I can really say that will change that. So
yeah, I mean that's basically what I was saying, Jack. I was saying, when once I've done the matchup process, like against you, I was expecting to beat Mark. I kind of knew Pete was going to lose, but I hoped he got a secret mission. I was actually hoping that Matt would do better than he did against the murder host, but I also knew that was it Craig who had that? No, who had the murder?
Yeah.
I also
Craig
knew that Craig knew the murder host better than Matt, so I kind of wasn't better than Matt knew the change host. I wasn't expecting him to win, but I was kind of hoping he'd do better than he did. So going into the games already, right at the start, I was like, I'm not going to go down and suddenly say you've got to do this, because it's not a 20-0 system. It's like sort of knowing in your head roughly what points we're going to get out of this round almost at the start and hoping that happens.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I mean, I think the only thing I kind of like, the dynamic that I really like about a team tournament is, as I said, the one game that I lost, the team capped the round. And so actually, you lose a game and you don't lose a second sleep or post analysis or care in the slightest, because it doesn't matter that I just lost this game because the team won the round. And actually, the only thing that matters in a team tournament is whether the team win or not. And if you lose 5 games but your team win 5 rounds, 100 points, you've had a perfect weekend. And I always think that's the beauty of team tournaments.
Yeah, and it's being able to have that mentality as well, isn't it? Because some people one of my players in particular was still getting really upset if he was losing, and he'd get upset when he'd lost a game which I told him he was going to lose. I was like, "You're going to lose this game. Get this secret mission." Like, and it's like there's no need to be upset about it. This has happened in the matchup process, but me and X have both won, so that's good. And it's getting out of that mentality of the individual thing, and because everyone's got that natural instinct to win. And it's realizing that winning the round is the winning. It's not having the game and that going badly for you.
Yeah, no, we started to say in our team that it was everyone's turn to lose. So we, the first 4 rounds, I think a different player lost each round, and so it was your turn. It's kind of. So that was that was a really nice dynamic. I think about a team tournament. It is all about the team's result. And actually, the only other thing I'd say is, which can also apply to a singles event, is we were there to do well. We weren't there to try and middle table it. We wanted to win the event. And so there was one game with Mark playing against Tom in the Morders game, which I think was good. I always thought would be our hardest round. And he was kind of saying, "Oh, do I risk it? I need double turn for it to work. Otherwise it'll all go wrong." And I was like, well, we're not here to come second. If you have to risk it all on getting a double turn, risk it all on getting a double turn, And so that's the only thing as I would kind of say is, if you need to take a big risk, but you'll win if you do it, yeah, go for it. We're here to win.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I have much to add to either of your sets of comments on that topic. It's good having the dynamic at a team tournament where if you are in that position as a quandary as an individual player going, well, look, do I push? Do I try and overextend with the hope of a double turn? Having the ability to have a chat with your coach and talk it through for a couple of minutes before making the decision is certainly a bit of a comfort and a backstop.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, in terms of the results, unsurprisingly, perhaps team winners won. So Jack's team took out first place. Second place.
It was quite funny. Basically, it's. I was going to say it's more a fact that I have no imagination whatsoever, and so when the calls for a team name were coming around, I couldn't think of anything remotely funny or anything. So I was just like, okay, just team winners, and then it kind of stuck, and then we just had to go and try our hardest to not look like complete muppets by losing.
It would have been brilliant if you'd finished in mid-table mediocrity.
Well, I actually said it'd be worse if we'd finished second, because then everyone, that would have been almost the ultimate mocking.
It would be. You can't have second, you can't have mid-table mediocrity. The only other way you can do it is to get the wooden spoon and be ironic about the entire thing.
I was going to say, we could have owned that, but yeah, anything else we would have just been mocked endlessly. But yeah.
So second place was Ian Brucicus, the Bruce's team, and Dan Bradshaw and others. Marauders came in third. Best international team was the team from France, who I can't pronounce, unfortunately.
Look in the team. They had some very good lists.
There you go. And best sports went to the Germans, the Crown of Champions.
Yeah, that was thoroughly deserved. We played them. They were really, really nice blokes. Played the game in a really good way. I've thoroughly enjoyed the round.
And they brought cases of German beer with them as well, which I'm sure has nothing to do with why they won best sports.
Well, there was, to be honest though, my game was really interesting because my guy spoke really, really bad English. So, but fortunately, because his teammates were around him, there were just moments where you were kind of interpreting, where I was like, "Can you just tell him this?" Because he just wasn't getting it, and he was so nice along with it. And you kind of just went with stuff, but it was fine. There was a brilliant moment where I was trying to explain the Lord Celestin on a Dracos breath attack, and he just didn't understand. How it could hit multiple units and stuff, and it was sort of trying to explain it in English. But that was the game where you were saying, "Oh, it's hard to kill people, a monster with a battle line." Where I killed the greater demon, the Slanesh one, the greater
Keeper of Secrets.
Yeah, and I shot it with Judicators for most of the game, and then ran some Judicators all the way across the board to poke it in the last turn to get the one poke that took it down. I was quite pleased with that.
That's an epic story. I can't believe you were actually able to run down a greater demon from.
Because it was duality, he had to stay on it, so he couldn't run away. So he was.
Fair enough. Now it will become clear. Yeah. I was like, how do 5 clunky guys in suits of armour chase down a greater demon for God known for fast movement?
Yeah, I know. Oh, the Slanesh guys are fast, aren't they? I was amazed. It's like turn one charges. I was like, crikey. I was like, baseline.
Yeah,
Crazy.
that's what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a guy locally who has played a couple of Slaanesh lists with lots and lots of Seekers, and just the sort of conga lining board control minuses to hit you can get from big units of Seekers pinning you in place and various other things. They can do some fairly nasty things to you.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So before we round out, did you guys have any last comments? I know, Tom, you're going to probably be in the depths of preparation for the London Grand Tournament. So do you want to tell us a bit about how that's going?
Yeah, it's going really well. We're into the last push now. Obviously, we've got 2 months, a bit more than 2 months to the event. We sort of partnered with Mark for building up to the event actually. So we gave away a free ticket to the best painted guy at Blood Tithe, and that was Adam Kunis in the end. So you got a free ticket to the event, which was good. And then I've kind of been in quite close discussions with him about his FAQs, and because he had all his and we've had ours, and kind of amalgamating London events together, because moving forward we're probably going to be the 2 largest London events, so it kind of makes sense to tie us in with that. But yeah, we're on 80 players now. We're into the 80s, and the organisers just opened up another 20, so we're trying to push for 100. So hopefully we'll get as close to that as we can, which is, I think you probably agree, Jack, that's really good for a first London event.
Oh,
Wasn't expecting that at all.
No,
so I'm very pleased.
And also it's a week away from South Coast, which is one of the biggest UK tournament, world tournaments. So actually, it loses a lot of people because of some unfortunate timing to that. So it's even more impressive at how many people are managing to make it.
No, that's certainly a very good number in the circumstances that you've got, and it'll be really interesting to see as we get closer to the event that grow. Hopefully you get that 100 and then hear more about it on the day.
Yeah, I'm really hoping so. And now we're into this 2 months of frantic terrain building to get all that done in time. But it should be good.
I don't suppose you've been following Domus on Twitter as he's been trying to build a ridiculous amount of terrain for Adepticon this year, have you?
Yeah, I've been watching that. We're stealing all his ideas, of course. That's taken it.
I think I did a Saturday night after a few too many glasses of wine with him and Aurelian and some of the other lots, which was quite good fun.
Yeah, a man who puts his hand up to do sort of 90 pieces of terrain from scratch for a tournament, certainly an absolutely heroic effort.
Yeah, kudos. I mean, that's the situation we're going to get in. I think it's worth mentioning and saying sort of thank you, because GW have been really supportive for us for this event. I know that they're going to continue to be supportive moving forwards. They're supporting us with the Games Workshop trophies. Have you seen the hammers, like the Sigmar hammers that they use with their GTs? They're giving us those for our trophies, which is really cool. We're going to do those alongside your generic, what people quite like, sort of big weaponry and things like that, which will be confirmed on the day. But we're really glad that GW is supporting us at that, and they put it out on Warhammer Community, and the TV guys are coming down, and clearly they're on board with what we're trying to do, which is great.
Oh, great. It's always good to see Games Workshop support alongside these things and helping the community to grow. So thanks. All that's really left to say is for me to say thanks, guys, once again for giving up your time, for coming on the show and talking about the event. I think there's certainly a lot of really useful information in there for people looking to prepare for their next team tournament, maybe even their first team tournament, and thinking about how to put a team together, put lists together, and get successfully through the pairings and matchup process. So I'm going to try and extract all of those gems of wisdom, distill them and put them into a blog post which will accompany this show, just so there's a reference for people to go back to. So I highly recommend that they check them out. Otherwise, thank you very much, and bye for now.